Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole Young Martin, and I serve as producer, host, and founder of the series. Thank you. This is season 4. I cannot believe I'm saying this. This is season 4. We've been doing this since Juneteenth of 2020, and I'm so proud to be back with season 4. So just a little bit of what we've been doing over the summer, because this is the first time since Black Writers Read has been going. We took a little bit of kind of a break, but we did have a productive summer. We hosted 2 virtual book club chats with past guests on books featured on Black Writers Read, and we officially launched our website. We are now online at www.blackwritersread.com. I want to give a special shout out to Artist Dynamics and Fungi Chicha Wagawa, his company, for their very hard work, collaboration, vision, and execution of this very beautiful website. I'm so excited to be back for the season. We have a great variety of writers who'll be joining us, including, I'm so happy to announce this, other writers of color for special episodes entitled Black Writers Read Writing Across the Margins. I know so many writers from many diasporas who are doing important work to shape and redefine the literary canon. I wanted an opportunity to chat with them, and we'll be using this platform, Writing Across the Margins, to host these vital conversations. So please be on the lookout for announcements about these episodes on both our website and social media. We are on Instagram at Black Writers Read, and again, we are now officially online at www.blackwritersread.com. I am beyond excited to officially launch this season. So let's get started with today's conversation. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted almost 60 authors representing 10 plus genres from 4 countries and 13 states here in the United States. Today, we welcome Sami Miranda. Sami Miranda grew up in the South Bronx and resides in Washington, D.C. He is a visual artist, poet, and teacher who uses his craft to highlight the value of everyday people and places. His work is heavily influenced by Puerto Rican culture and family history, as well as his interactions with his students, people who he encounters in his travels, and DC locals. Much of his work is figurative and explores how the body and face illustrate the successes, hardships, and beliefs that people carry with them. He is the author of Protection from Erasure, published by Jaded Ibis Press, Departure, a chapbook published by Central Square Press, and We is published by Zozobra Publishing. He is currently working on collaborative projects with musicians and visual artists about the deep connections they can make through their artwork. Samuel's artwork has been exhibited internationally in Puerto Rico and Madrid, as well as New York and Washington, D.C. Excuse me, I'm still dealing with a little bit of a COVID cough a year later. Most recently, Samuel's artwork has been included in the Smithsonian's new Molina Family Latino Gallery inaugural exhibit, Presente. His artwork has been included in university and private collections. Today, Sami will share excerpts from his latest poetry collection, Poetry from Erasure. In this poetry collection, Samuel Miranda aims to capture and celebrate a life lived and lives encountered. Excuse me. Through observations and conversations, we're reminded that mundane events and minute moments in our everyday lives can and should be memorialized. Part portraiture, part social commentary, and part memory, Protection from Erasure is meticulously crafted with arresting dialogue, sincere lines, and raw reflections that knit together and hover upon the edge of a shared remembrance. Today's episode is presented in collaboration with Levee Break Lit. Special thanks to Lisa Pegram for introducing us to Sami. For those of you who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format. Sami will first read excerpts from Protection from Erasure, then we'll chat about his book and writing career. If time remains at the end of our conversation, we'll open it up to question and answers with those of you who are joining us today. We have viewers joining us from both Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from. I will compile the questions and either pose them excuse me, to our guests following our conversation or insert them during an appropriate time within our chat. I'd now like to invite Sami onto the virtual stage.
Hey, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm
How's it going?
so excited for you to read today.
And
Because one of the questions that I have for you later is just how this work really lives off the page and it's so auditory. So, and given that I do spoken word, I'm like, yes, I can't wait for him to read.
that's awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right.
So the stage is yours.
All right. Let's get to it. So, I came to poetry through my students. So, I'm going to start this reading with a piece called Self Portrait in Green Overcoat and Purple Messenger Bag and Chalk Powder. Children notice everything, and you can begin to see only when you understand this. You know nothing about yourself except what 9 and 10-year-olds point out. Here you are lost, like language in the mouths of children, who silence their difference to keep fists from reminding them. You fill a chalkboard with ways to respond, teach the words that in their simplicity become a shield. You aren't the silence of your own childhood. Voice has become a thing to be passed down, to be taught, so you find yours. Let's see where we're going next. And I'm kind of scrolling, so forgive me. It's you know, I think when I think about what I'm gonna read to folks, like I start like watching through and I say, no, not that one, and then yeah, so okay. So actually, this is one I actually don't read much, but I've been teaching in schools within cities my whole teaching career, and I've been teaching since 1992. And one of the things that's always bugged me is the metal detectors that had to watch kids walk through and still watch kids walk through. So this is called Searched. Mornings, I stand stretching arms out as if in preparation for flight. Let strangers' probing hands roam my body, looking for the anger I might have stored, steel sharpened, razor thin. Looking for the revenge I might have tucked into the small of my back. At 14, I am a threat, searched daily. Nothing has been found. The right places haven't been searched. Hands can't find the bulge of my depression, can't slide across the sharpened edge of my loneliness. Mornings, I stand, stretch my arms out as if in preparation for flight, hoping feathers sprout from my pores and I take to the air, away from searching hands and into the arms of a sky that knows the things I hide. So one of the other things, like I tell folks, I'm a New Yorker. I'm a DC poet, but I am a New Yorker. That's the place that birthed me physically, and like where I grew up. And the place I really enjoyed being was the subway. I loved riding the train because there was an anonymity to it that like really allowed me, this quiet kid, to kind of disappear amongst millions of people, right? So this is a piece called Hiding Place, which we've also done a film for, that's like now running the festival circuit. Um, Hiding Place. The doorway to your favorite hiding place is the Prospect Avenue station, where you pop over the turnstile when you hear the train coming. On the platform, you place your headphones on your ears, press play on some house or Latin hip hop, choose between the 2 or the 5, both heading into Manhattan. Choose the 2, but do not hide yourself. There are things you need to say, things that others need to hear leave your mouth. When you want to disappear, do it knowing that when you step off the number 2 train heading downtown and get lost in a crowd of people who do not notice you because they are lost in the worlds you make up for them, you need to return. Mouth cluttered with words to organize, eyes crowded with images you will translate. ears composing notes into a song that you will turn into. You need to return to that project apartment, and to the brother whose voice is so much louder than yours, and the mother whose silence is mirrored in you, and the father who sings off key, who loves another, and the sisters who you never quite understood. And let sound fall from your mouth, even if it is a wail to let loose the years of holding back tears, even if it is a curse, a fuck, or motherfucker, or coño, even if it is a single word, any word that you yell with the door of apartment 2A open, standing in the threshold so it echoes in those empty hallways and slides under door jams to a person who needs to hear it. Now, one of the other things, I'm going to read another train poem, another self portrait, and a train poem. So it's self portrait in Lee jeans and suede pumas. And if you were a kid who came up in the 80s, you understand what I'm talking about. There's nothing to see here, nothing out of the ordinary. Just another passenger on the downtown bound 5 train, looking for silence in the rumbling of train, track, and tunnel, searching for anonymity in rush hour crowds, cassette bought and dropped into Walkman, soundtrack sampled. Let's see. So one of the folks who really like has informed my body of work is this best bass player Pepe Gonzalez, who I met in 1996 and I've been performing with ever since. I always tell folks he's the one who taught me how to read poetry, because I hear his bass line in my head. So it's like I try to make sure that my breath and my spaces leave space for that bass. So this is called Spanish Joe Finds His Father. And that was what he went by when he was a kid, Spanish Joe. It ain't a place we usually welcome, but Flaco Frio, Fat Jesus, and I, we go where we feel moved to go. And the girl who works there, what's she gonna say? Gonna say, can I help you? Gonna say, is there something you need? Galleries always have something I like. Images that call my eye and make me think, but this one had a piece of me I needed, had a piece of me I didn't know existed. An image of El Viejo, not the man who made me, the man who broke me, who let me know I had no worth, not the father I battled against. This was the picture of man I rarely caught a glimpse of. Here I see him seeing me for what I am. So I offer to buy him so I can watch him watching. Pull the wad from my pocket to show I can pay. But the girl who works there, what she say? She says, the artist ain't selling. She says, there's nothing I can do. She says, it isn't for sale. So I sent Fat Jesus to distract, because in this photo, El Viejo is focused. Let him talk her up, because in this photo, El Viejo has nothing bad to say. Let her tell her she is more beautiful than she is, because in this photo, El Viejo saw beauty in me. Let Flaco Frio watch for her return so that I can watch him watching. I peel this image from the frame and mat and slide it under my shirt, hugged against my skin. We leave, and she ain't none the wiser, just smiling a piropo-induced smile, never knowing that this heist hit the heart hard and softened it against an old man who knew my anger as clearly as he knew his own. So one of the things that I also tend to do is that I write poems based on artwork um, that I feel kind of hits, or on phrases that people share with me. So I'm looking for a piece now that kind of does that. And let's see where we go. Oh, Here we go. So this is actually, I did a whole series of poems that were composed from phrases that I cut out of National Geographic magazines. Um, so they're collage poems, found poems, however you want to label them. And this is one. This one is called "Protection from Predators." A young man asked his father why blacks born in the United States feel unwelcome. Ask one of the Americans who've survived. Oh Lord, won't you buy me protection from predators, armor against decay? Listen, this is tough to admit. Time has not eased the grief of a woman whose son died. Prayers soften hard times for families. I would like to think that, but no. One day I called on Nina. She still smelled of charred flesh. Raising a hymn on Sunday, barbed but beautiful. This song should be sung only by its owners. I have been dealing a lot also with the idea of migration and immigration, movement across borders, and because I teach a lot of students who are from immigrant families or immigrants themselves. Um, so home and the definition of home is something I grapple with a bit, especially also because I'm Puerto Rican, and Puerto Rico is a colony. Um, so when you think about nationhood and you think about what people consider home, whether that's where you were born or where your ancestry is from or where you reside in the moment, right? Or is it all of those? So this piece is called Home. When it's time to leave it all behind, discard button, bead, or bauble. Leave all things unfamiliar, but be sure not to miss the boat. People are moving quietly, migratory water birds in flight. Many immigrants land in a city of so many places. Everyone sooner or later finds one special they name home. Let's see if I do maybe two more, and then tap into like the conversation. This is self-portrait with mullet at 120 pounds soaking wet. And this is a piece that really looks at who I was when I entered university. I went to Georgetown. It was the first predominantly white space I'd ever been in. This is an unfamiliar space, one where I am the unfamiliar. They notice the difference. I know who's different. I look for those who know where I am from, who know empty pockets don't translate to empty minds. Can't wrap my mind around how home is a different something, how family questions my belonging, how they want to wash away the unfamiliar. Fuck. I'm just listening to music that will move my feet. See if unfamiliar becomes enticing enough for someone to want to dance with me. Let's see how we end this. So there's an artist. I'm looking for a piece by that I use in response to her name, Karen Miranda Rivadeneira, no relation, who is a photographer and does these beautiful photos of reenactment from childhood, right? And I walked into the Smithsonian once, and I was there looking at these large, like wall-size images, and I look at the image and I look next to me, and then I see that the woman in the image is the woman standing beside me. So we got into a conversation, and then I got into a conversation with her work, which is often the way it happens, right? You find people to connect to, and those people are the ones that kind of inform your practice in many ways. So let me see if I find one of the pieces I wrote with her photos in mind. Because again, those form part of this body of work and are poems that I really enjoyed writing. Let's see, it's not that one. There we go. All right, we're getting to it. So this, if in 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 many Latino cultures, in many cultures, there's this whole idea of the evil eye, um, and for us, it's called mal de ojo. So, and usually you try to find protection for that. Um, so this piece that I'm going to read is called mal de ojo. There is always someone watching, waiting to bring something down on you. Always someone whose eye invades the balance between spirit and body. Someone who will compliment the child and forget to offer up a blessing, protection against petty spirits who want to prove that nothing is more beautiful than them. And always someone to block the path that evil winds down, maybe a mother who knows the power of crucifixes, el divino niño, and an egg touched to a body dressed only in its skin. Curandera, who understands the rezos, los de jarabe, Florida water, sage, and tobacco, and practices the rituals that drive fever from the body, pushing it to find its way into a glass of water placed under the bed or on a nightstand where it can no longer heat flesh into discomfort. There's always the non believer who doesn't not understand the medicine of an elder's memory and its connection to ancestors who add their breath to the smoke blown from the lips of descendants who have learned how healing is passed down. I think maybe actually let's hit you with one another found poem and then we'll call it quits for the reading. Maybe read something a little later again. So this is called Found Poem, Corner of New Hampshire and Piney Branch. Please. This is what my mama taught me to say before I ask for anything. I am need. This is my alter ego, my superhero identity, the one that makes me do this electric boogaloo along the double yellow line, that makes me tap at your window with this handmade sign. Help God bless you. Because you know he ain't paying you no mind, just like you ain't paying me no mind. But he will if you just pay a quarter, a dime, or nickel. He'd prefer you paying dollar bills, 20s if you have them to spare. Meet me with kindness in exchange. Blessings, blessings, blessings. I guess we'll stop there.
Yes. I read, Protection from Erasure, and it's like to hear it lands so much differently. Like I just got like even more vivid imagery as you were reading than what it lives on the page. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you told the story about Georgetown. And me, I went to a bunch of PWIs as well. I started off at the University of Michigan. And like now I kind of understand a little bit because one of the questions I have is about the origin story of Protection from Erasure. First question, and I'm so glad that you read, and it's the opening poem, Self-Portrait with Mullet at 120 Pounds Soaking Wet, because it gave the background story about your experience being a student of color at a PWI, which is a very, very interesting experience, especially today. And it gives a great context for what we're going to get in Protection from Erasure. So the first question I have for you is, can you talk about the origin story of Protection from Erasure, which is why I absolutely love that that's the very first poem of this book. What inspired this poetry collection at this time in your career? And then also a little bit of insight on the title.
Okay. So I always tell folks that this book and We Is, the book prior to this, are 20 years of writing, right? So there's some poems in Protection of Erasure that were written in 1996, right? Because the way I go about like putting a book together is really around looking at the whole body of work and seeing what aligns. Um, and I think for this one, the title came after that process, right? Because what I was noticing about the pieces, especially about the self portraits, right, is that I was a really quiet kid, like super introverted. Like folks who know me now, if they met me like in 1986, 85, would be like, "Who the hell are you?" Um, so I kind of like I tell folks like, I grew up in New York in the projects. My brother fought every day, and I just disappeared, right? Because that was the way I protected myself. I cut class all the time by myself. I hopped on the train so nobody would pay attention to me because I was a little skinny kid who sat in the corner of the car and just like, I disappeared into the subway. I disappeared into the streets downtown, you know. And I think you're kind of forced into that in many ways because to be noticed could have been not a pleasant experience, right? Um, but also, I think what it allowed me to do with time is to like be an observer, right? So I really started watching folks and watching people. I wasn't writing at the time, I wasn't drawing at the time, but I was a people watcher, right? And I would notice how some folks were super noticeable and others could get away with not being seen at all, you know? And then when I started teaching, I was teaching in a school where Latinos had just started coming in, and it was a predominantly Black school. I was the only Latino teacher at the school um, for like, so, and it was like probably a school of 200, and 20 of the kids were Latino. Um, so, and it became something where they also felt like I gotta figure out how to not be seen, or and often language made them invisible, right? Because people would just ignore who they were, and in classes they were ignored, right? There were times when I would walk into a class and the kid that I was working with was sitting in the back in a corner because the teacher had no way of communicating with him and wasn't trying, right? So they disappeared, those kids, right, automatically, in a space that should have been where they found voice, right? Um, and I felt like my grandfather also added to that, right? Because I would ask him, I'll say, Abuelo, like, tell me stories about when you were a kid. And he'd look at me like dead ass in the face, and he'd be like, um, for what? It doesn't matter, right? So I'm just kind of like, and then when he died, he left all these documents and photos that spanned from the 19 that he took that spanned from the 1940s, or he collected from people who sent him, into the 1980s. So he basically had photographed, through photographing his family and his friends and the soldiers he was with in the Panama Canal during World War II. He basically documented Puerto Rican migration.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? So, and he thought he had nothing to say, right? He kept the numbers he played.
Yeah.
He had the certificate he had to get in the 60s, early 60s, in order to prove he was literate enough to vote. And this is New York City, not the South, right? So in order to vote, he had to prove that he had at least an 8th grade education or could read and speak English. And he served in the US military, right? So there's all these, like, all of those things are kind of what have kept me like thinking about that topic, that we are so easily erased from things. And not to mention the canon, not to mention like history. They're trying to erase us from history now, you know. So all of this kind of, I think for this collection, when I was looking through it, I was like, yeah, this is what it's about, you know. And these are the pieces that kind of fit that idea, you know.
So the book cover, which in a video of yours, which folks, if you can please find Samuel Miranda on YouTube. I love the videos that are on your channel. There's a video of you in one of the videos I saw of you. It looks like you were making the artwork for the book cover.
That's, yeah. I mean, that's me at 10.
I figured this was you. I was like, this is
Yeah, that's me at 10.
him.
Yeah. So I think one of the things was like when I was thinking about the cover for it, I was trying to figure out like how do you best illustrate like that erasure, right? And I think my erasure started as a kid, right? Because I was quiet, because I was introverted, because I wasn't as loud as my brother, you know what I mean? You know, who I love, I do love him, you know. But it was just kind of like this situation where, so when I started thinking about the cover, I was just like, you know, I'm the one who I was erased in many ways. And Georgetown didn't help with that, right? You know, I mean, in many ways, teaching helped a bit because I had to kind of become visible, right? But like when I look back at things, it's like it started there. It started with like this whole sense of this quiet kid who, you know, people just easily could ignore. I mean, my teacher, I got great grades in high school and I was hardly ever there, you know, because I was so quiet and I was so non-disruptive that teachers just said, oh, Sammy's going to be okay. Which in the end harmed me, right? You know, because when I got into college, you know, I thought I was the shit, right? I knew my stuff. I was prepared and I was far from prepared, you know? And what that did was it made me even step back a little further because, you know, I'd be in a class on philosophy, something I've never studied before, and they'd mention people and everybody seemed to have some kind of understanding of it. And they'd ask a question and I'd have an idea, but I wouldn't raise my hand, right? And then somebody else would say exactly what I was thinking, you know, but I didn't feel like I had anything to say, or if I did, it wasn't the right thing to say. So then you quiet yourself, and in many cases, I quieted myself, you know, to the point that I was not present in the spaces that I needed to be in. You know, I think that's why that particular image, with the white coming across it, and it had to be white.
Yes,
It had to be white, right? You know, so I'm just saying.
the performative nature of your book.
You know, that cover, you notice what's coming from the, you know. So, because often that's when we feel most erased.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I appreciate your book covers so much because, like I tell my students, I'm an educator myself. Titles and book covers are your entryway into what you're going to be like. It prepares you in such a beautiful way, and it's just like I'm so glad that this was your book cover. Like oh my gosh, I have so many questions. I'm gonna jump around a little bit. And the reason why I'm going to do this is as you were reading and you cite him in your acknowledgments. And I didn't realize y'all knew each other, but I was like, Lisa Pegram, of course y'all could know each other. You and Enzo Solansaran, who we've had on Black Writers Read before, I've worked with him a lot of times. Your cadence is very similar. And also the ways in which you write are very similar. And also how you position yourselves as men and men of color in your work is very similar as well. And I love that he offered praise for this book. He wrote a call to action of the utmost urgency and speaks loudly about how often both body and land are brokered until a people and their history is completely erased. It gives voice to an impeding demise that needs a deliberate and decisive response. This is a significant book. So you open with a self-portrait, and there's self-portraits throughout, and now um, putting the connection of you as an artist there. And I have a question about all of your identities and subjectivity as well, was so important. You close this book with a poem called Self-Portrait with Fedora and Button Down, which now, knowing the story behind the first poem, I kind of can picture why this particular title. So, Self Portrait with Fedora and Button Down, which has lines that read like a call to action, like the following, and I love this line: make decisions as if they were typewritten, where every mistake requires a multi step process for correction. So, what is your call to action for protection for erasure, from erasure, and how would you like your readers to proceed once they've closed this book?
Oh, well, let me start with Enzo. Enzo
Yes.
actually published my first book. He was the first
Oh,
person to like take my work and put it into the world outside of me doing it, right? As a collection. So Departure was published by Central Square Press, which Enzo runs, right? Um, and like and Lisa is in that too, because Lisa was
yep.
like, Enzo connect to Sammy, and Enzo connected to me, and I talked to Enzo, and now like, I love the guy, right? Because he has such a wonderful like voice, and he does for people, right?
Yes.
He has no qualms around saying, I love your work, I'm gonna publish you. You know, I don't care what anybody, if I love it,
Yeah.
and that's what I want to publish, right? And it's a beautiful thing to see him do that. Um, but I think like the call to action, so I do workshops with I teach high school currently, and I've been
Mm.
doing it. This is my 31st year in education. Um,
Wow.
so, but when I do workshops outside, what I ask of folks is that they leave the space understanding that every story has importance, right? And to find the person whose story they need to hear,
Mm.
right? And to figure out a way to document that, right? Because I think oftentimes we we sit around and we don't give value to the people around us, right? I mean, my grandfather, like like he had so much to offer, right? And I'm thinking about so Spanish Joe Pepe Gonzalez is another person, right? So he's been playing music in DC since the 60s, right? And there's a bunch in both We Is and in Protection from Erasure. Their poems, there's a whole body of work about Pepe. My visual work, I have a whole body of visual work around Pepe. I just did a movie that I did in collaboration with Ellie Walton, a filmmaker, about Pepe.
Mm.
You know, because he is someone who will sit with you and tell you stories, but he don't give a shit about recognition,
Mm.
right? He'll sit there and he'll go out and he's played with everybody. I mean, his as a 18-year-old, he opened up with his band for Miles Davis. I mean, you know, like, and he's traveled the world and done music, and he's taught folks who are doing wonderful things, and you know, so when I think about it, he's 70. He's probably got a good more 20 years more, maybe, you know, and but he needs to see that other people notice what he's doing.
Mm.
And I think everybody needs to see somebody notice what they're doing. So the call to action is notice somebody and let them know you notice them, you know, and do it in a way that says, I'm going to notice you. And if you're a writer, you're a painter, you're a movie maker, you're a musician, then hell, write a song about that motherfucker.
Yes.
Write a poem about him. Like all those everyday people that you come across deserve a story. Have a story. And the thing is, usually the people who tell their stories, if they're black and brown folk, are not black and brown folk.
Mhm.
It's white folk who go in and take the story, right? As opposed to us listening to each other and sharing stories and then translating those stories, right? Like that's the deal, right? You gotta, like, I ain't taking Pepe's stories. He and I share those stories, right? Like I started performing with Pepe in '96 and basically started hanging out in his basement with him since then. Like we share a bottle of wine, we talk, we like, he tells me stories. I go home, I write a poem about the story, I come back, I read it to him, he gets on his bass and he plays a tune that's now gonna go with that poem. Right? So all those poems about Spanish Joe have like a musical like, partner, right? So and then we play them together, you know. But he deserves to have his story told. We all deserve to have our stories told, you know. It's like in some way or another, and especially for young folks, like we've been doing workshops because there's a movie called La Mamplesa that I'm a part of and that Pep is a part of, about the uprisings in DC that happened in Mount Pleasant neighborhood in '91. It was like, so the Rodney King beating happened, and then the uprisings in Mount Pleasant happened, and then the LA uprisings happened.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Not a lot of folks do, right? Because what they did was they basically said, well, that's black brown thing, because the officer who shot the Salvadoran man was a young black woman officer, right? So no, that has nothing to do with policing. That has to do with black and brown people, right? So, but like in that, I think films like that allow the voices of artists to tell a story of something that occurred, right? Like are super helpful in terms of helping us like take it in and understand why those stories are important to tell, right? So one of the other folks in that movie is Lilo Gonzalez, who's like a Salvadoran folk singer who has like some beautiful music. He taught my kid music. He taught kids all over the city music, you know. And he stood in front of the screen and he looked at the screen as he was being interviewed and playing his music, and he says, "Hey, that's me. And I'm still alive." Like, how do you know what I'm saying? Like, that is me and I'm still alive. Somebody saw me. Somebody sees me, right? You know what I'm saying? And now other people get to see like what the story is and my part in that story. So that's the call. Tell somebody's story. Share a story. Listen to a story. More than anything, listen to people's stories. You know? Because that's what we need. We need to be heard. We need to be seen. You know? As an artist, be the head nod. You know, it's like as an artist, be the head nod. I see you, I recognize you. You know, and just like get it done.
Yeah, and this is one of the beautiful things I'm realizing about Black Writers Read. For people who have been following, we're a very tight network. Even though we are around the globe, we're a very tight network. I first started off with hosting Friends, and then now I got introduced to Lisa Pegram and Enzo and all these folks, and they are now bringing me into their fold. And then next week, which I'm really excited, someone whose career I've been following and who has evolved in multiple ways. I'm hosting him next week. So I love that these networks exist, and also the giving of flowers, which, as you were talking, it reminded me, and you said that the musician had a chance to watch his story while he was alive. I recently, I recently watched documentary on Wayne Shorter's Zero Gravity, which was filmed while he was alive. And I can tell that he played. I loved it. It's 3.5 hours long. It's different portals episodes, but you have to watch it in one sitting. It's on Amazon, and you can tell that he played such a very important role in shaping the documentary and shaping the story that was told on his life. And after watching it, because it came out on his birthday, and for folks who don't know, such a prolific. I'm also in music. He passed away earlier this year, and just the fact that he was able to be a part of archiving his story, telling his story as a Black man who was very prolific in music, who was an innovator in jazz and so many modes of storytelling, was so important. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, and also that particular call to action, because honestly, that's why Black Writers Read started. It became, I'm an educator. I've been in the arts for a long time in many different realms, and in each realm, it's been folks of color, marginalized communities, immigrants. We're all the and or but when it comes to particular genres in the arts.
Yeah.
And our stories are always, which I love the National Geographic piece, the poem and the book. It's always, our stories are being told from a particular lens that not only doesn't have our experience, but they're watching us in a particular way, and they capture us to be watched in a particular way as opposed to sharing in a particular way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so that's why I'm like, oh, and there's a question that I have that segues beautifully from that point, and I am trying to find it.
And while you do that, so that photo in back of me is one that my grandfather took.
Oh wow!
So.
Oh, it's such an adorable photo. I hope folks purchase the book. It's such an adorable photo. But yes, this is the question. And so folks who are joining us, I typically create and send interview questions. Now my dogs decide to go off, which they always tend to like show up in the background. I don't know if y'all can hear them. There's somebody. How dare they walk down the street in our neighborhood? So, and they're guarding the castle. So I typically like to put together the interview questions and review them with our guests prior, because I want them to be a part of co-creating this experience. And so I'm jumping around the questions that I devised. So this is one question that kind of segues nicely from what we just recently talked about. So similar to other writers featured on Black Writers Read, your writing evokes deeply personal journeys, those that may be of your own, but also those that may be of people in your community and your readers. You specifically mentioned in a recent video on your YouTube channel that you're giving people their flowers before they die, and you also mentioned it during this interview. This is a lot to hold, and you do it in such a beautiful way in your work. So given that this is a lot to hold, what is your self-care and self-check rituals when writing? And how do you hold space for yourself when writing about the experiences representing folks, including yourself, who are often invisible?
Um, I think part of that is what my process is, right? Because I don't. That process is about being in community, right? So oftentimes, because I'm not really like I'm writing it on my own, but I'm not really composing it on my own in many ways because I'm composing it through the listening, right? And I'm composing it through the interactions with other people. Um, so oftentimes the weight of it is a shared weight,
Mm.
right? So I'm not carrying that by myself. You know, that whole idea of like the artist who shoves himself into his like room or his studio or her like, you know, her corner of the world and just stays there. I think that's a bunch of crap, right? Because you can't create if you're not in community, right? And for me, I think that's my self-care, right? It's like always being surrounded by people who I can share that with, right? I'm not carrying that by myself, you know. Um and it's co-created. Like I'm a collaborative like artist, right? I have paintings where I started it and a guy comes in and he's like, "Hey," and I hand him the brush and he finishes the painting. It's a whole different style, but they are in conversation and there's like really beautiful pieces, right? Um I think, you know, and I have work where I've just like asked folks to send me 3 words, 3 objects, and like 3 like colors that they would want in portraits of themselves. And then we co-create the portrait by them having that kind of input, right? Um, so the I think my process keeps me pretty stable and planted and rooted, right? Um, in the community that I feel like in the communities really that I feel a part of, right? And then there's always like, you know, a cigar and some like good brown liquor on the front porch, you know, on a rainy night, you know, like and a good meal, you know,
Yes.
and a wonderful trip, you know. So I've been trying to do like trips to different places on my own just to kind of like experience the space and get to know the space. Um, so those kinds of things kind of like keep me in a space where I'm just I stay pretty balanced, you know, because again I have people who share who share the weight of it. I'm not doing this on my own.
And speaking of community, this is a great way to segue into this question. In the acknowledgement section, which is so beautifully written, and it really demonstrates how important community is to you. You thank members of the DC poetry community. We've had others on from the DC area on Black Writers Read before, like Lisa Pegram. Can you talk about why the DC poetry community is so important to you in your work? And then why the DC poetry, the literary arts, and performance, because there's a very beautiful enclave of folks in the DC area community. Why are they vital to not only DC and the East Coast, but to the overall national landscape of culture?
Um, well, I'll start with a story, right? So when I started teaching in 1992, and I was teaching little kids. I started in 4th and 5th grade. I went down to 1st and 2nd grade. I went down to pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and then I went up to 9th grade in '96. When I went up to 9th grade, I didn't know what I was doing my first 4 years either, but I really did not know what I was doing at that point when I went to high school, right? Because I had experience with like a lot of younger kids. So I figured, you know what? I'm gonna teach these kids how to read poetry and analyze it and write it because I like it. Because I didn't really have a curriculum at the time either, right? So I start working with young people, and they're like, not gonna write because you ain't doing nothing. So we made a deal. I wrote with them, and we all wrote. Right. So they actually started me writing poetry. Right. So I would read their stuff, and I'm like, oh, y'all got to share this outside of the classroom. And one night we went to an open mic. Like there were 20 of us, a mixture of students and teachers. We go to this open mic, um, and Tony Asante Lightfoot, who's running this open mic at Mango's on U Street, comes up to our table and says, "You all are reading."
Yes.
And the kids all look at me, and I turn around and I'm like, if I read, every single one of you will get up there and read too.
Yes.
Right. And the crazy thing is, we all did. But what was beautiful about it, and maybe I'm inflating it, but I don't think I am, is that when those kids came off the mic, all the poets in that space went and talked to those young people about their work. They weren't sitting there talking about, oh, how nice it is to see a kid on the mic. No. Oh, so why'd you choose to do that? Yo, can you read that line to me again? I mean, they were having conversations about craft with 14-year-olds.
Nice.
Right? And I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh shit.
Yes.
This is kind of banging. I wanna be part of that. Like these are people, and it's like, but that was the thing. Like DC writers hold you accountable. Right? This is not about like, I mean, I'll take you back to another Tony Asante Lightfoot story, right? She ran an open mic called It's Your Mug in the 90s. We're actually making a film currently about the 90s open mic scene in DC because it was such a beautiful like moment in time, right? Um, but she ran an open mic called It's Your Mug, and Tuesday nights was the open mic. If you came 3 times in a row and read the same thing and hadn't worked it out, she wouldn't allow you to read again.
Yes.
Now here's the thing. Here were your options. You can read next Tuesday if you come to the workshop on Thursday. Where else in the country that happens?
Nowhere.
Right? So, and folks would go to the workshop and people would get better at their work. And she had 3 rounds. The first one was like finished stuff. Second one was OPP, other people's poetry. So you always had to read something that was by somebody else. So people were introduced to poets at these open mics. They were introduced to work that they wouldn't have necessarily been introduced to. They workshopped with each other. They left the open mic and went to a cafe and kept talking poetry. Right? I mean, and the thing is, right now, there's a young woman who's running the open mic at the American Poetry Museum, which I help manage. And she's having folks at the beginning of the open mic, Sasa Akil, she tells people, as you listen, jot down lines that you hear that you think are lovely, that you think work, that you enjoyed hearing. And at the end of the open mic, you know what happens? People share those lines. People talk about those lines, right? So, you sit, that's what DC is, right? It's a space that says, look, we're going to hold you accountable, but we're also going to let you know what's beautiful about your writing, And I think, I was like, it was crazy because I always tell folks the most scared I ever was when I got into a car with a bunch of DC area writers and they start talking about what books they're reading. Because the first question they ask you is, so what you reading? Because if you ain't reading, you ain't writing. Right? And I was like, Everybody else was answering. I'm in my head. I'm going, what can I say that I'm rereading? Because I've been focusing so much on on teaching that I ain't been reading nothing. But instead, you doing okay?
Yes, thank you. So I was muting. I got COVID in September of last year,
Oof.
and I've dealt with the cough since then. And everybody that's been I've even had to do an intermission during an episode. I was just like,
Hey,
oh my
let
god,
me know. Let me know if you need
I
a break.
I need this cough to be over because I'm like, I did get rid of it a little bit this summer, and then it was like, nope, I'm back. Like Freddy Cougar, I'm back, and I'm like,
Oof. I'm sorry to hear that, and I hope it goes away soon for you.
Thank you.
But yeah, what does DC have to offer everybody else? We some badass poets. It's like I always tell folks, I wouldn't be a poet, an artist, or a teacher in any other city. Not at all. Because I think this place, it birthed the art forms in me, but it also it taught me how you support other people within it, right? Like people here, we all apply for the same grants, we all apply for the same funding, we all apply for this and that, and everybody still tell you, yo, Sammy, this grant is coming up, or there's this opportunity over here, you got anything to do that day? Come on. It's like the community is I don't know, I just think it's pretty, right? It's just pretty, and I think it serves as a real model for what a writing community should feel like. You know what I mean? I think that's what we offer folks. I think we really DC serves as a model for what a community of writers feels like. Because it's a space that pushes you to be better, but doesn't try to force you into a particular kind of voice. Right? Oftentimes you'll go to a city and you'll know somebody's from that city, a writer's from that city, because the voice is familiar, right? In DC, you don't know that somebody's from DC as a writer, because every person has his own thing, right? Has found his own voice, and that voice has been cultivated by other writers, right? Because they're like, yo, you don't need to sound like nobody else. Figure who you are, and then go from there. And then let us know how we can help. Nice. But I also tell you that line you got in there, that shit sucks.
Yes.
And and then the next line that you wrote, that was the place to begin. It's like, I am not afraid to hand a poet a poem of mine, even if it's fresh, right? Because I trust them. I trust them to give it an eye that says, I'm gonna help you make this better, and I know that they've been studying craft, because that's the other thing about the writers in this city is they study craft. And mentorship is super important here. You have a lot of teaching artists in DC, a lot of artists who either are working for nonprofits or who are teachers in a more traditional sense, who are passing that on to younger folks, right? So I think, like I said, I wouldn't do this work in any other city, and I'll put us against anybody.
Yes. Yes. So I'm gonna wrap up shortly. I have two more questions for you. And speaking of community, I know this question also too kind of showcases another very special community. Protection from Erasure was published by Jaded Ibis Press. We've been very fortunate to hold several authors whose books have been published by this press. Why Jaded Ibis Press for Protection from Erasure? And then can you talk about how your relationship developed with this independent press.
Well, that can be answered in a name, Lisa Pegram.
Yep. Yes.
That's it. It's like Lisa Pegram. You know,
Yes.
again, I'm telling you, when I say DC got your back, DC's got your back as writers, right? Like this community helps you push your work as far as it can go. And Lisa's one of them folks, you know. So
Yeah, and I just love the beautiful relationships that she cultivates because we've had several Jaded Ibis Press authors on, and I'm like, oh, and we have a couple more, excuse me, coming on this season.
cool.
I would like to close out with what is next for you, and how can the Black Writers Read community support you on this journey?
Well, right now, really, I'm going the filmmaker route, like making that film about the DC poetry scene. I also did a film about Pepe Gonzalez. Um, I'm working on my visual work a great deal as well. So I got a couple of shows coming up around that here in the area. Um, Heading to Mexico City to do a performance in October. Um, so yeah, I've got some things coming up in that sense, but I'm always pushing work. So, you know, just like keep tabs on what's happening, and like when you can spread the word. You know.
Yes. So, Sami, thank you so much for being on today. And I remember when Lisa and I programmed you for this season, which was a little bit ago, I remember one of the first things she said was, she was like, Nicole, you're going to love Sami. That was like literally, she was like, do you want Sami on? You will love him. And I'm like, ah. And as we talked about before coming on camera, I hope this is just the beginning because I definitely want to work with you again.
Hey, absolutely. Let's do it.
Yes.
Let's do it. You know?
So, Sami, thank you so much for being on, and I'm gonna do a little bit of a closing and then wrap us up.
Sounds good.
Yes, have a great afternoon.
You too now. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
So, Black Writers Read, we have such a great season lined up for season 4. So please be sure to, and I'm so happy I can say this now, check out our website at blackwritersread.com for past episodes, information on upcoming guests, and also we have some events coming up separate from our live streams and podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep up with episodes of both Black Writers Read and my other projects. Also, be sure to subscribe to the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, as we post audio from each episode about a week after the live stream. And we do this for accessibility means. We have the live stream and then we have the audio podcast. Thanks to all of our viewers for spending your afternoon with us, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. See you soon.